Shalom. We have here with us Professor Galia Golan and David Makovsky. Both of you are veterans of either the academic or the practical issue of peace between Israelis and Palestinians, between Israel and the Arab world. I'll start with you, David. What would you see as a possible outcome of the last year of President Obama in office?
Okay, I think in the Obama administration there's a clear understanding that just having negotiations for the sake of negotiations is not going to get us anywhere when these leaders do not have any modicum of trust, and that a grand deal cannot be reached. So I think we saw it with Secretary Kerry's visit here. Was kind of buried a little bit when he was here in early December. But I do personally think there are like there's a four-part package if you wanted to put it together. One, because people understand that you're not going to have a grand deal, but could there be even new Rawabis, new Palestinian cities in Area C that would at least show some sort of direction? Point two, can Israel announce that, because for its own sake, not as a favor to Abu Mazen, but for its own sake, that that doesn't want to settle new people beyond the barrier? Point three, though, maybe Israel will get some things in return. Certain parts, blocks that even Abu Mazen, I'm not saying all, but some of the blocks that Abu Mazen even said, that's going to be Israel anyway. And I could go through that to get into details.
You mean the large settlement blocks?
Right. Well, not all of them, but some of them. Even he says he told this to Olmert in 2008.
Yeah.
Point. So in those areas, maybe the United States doesn't have to applaud it, but the U.S. can say, and the Palestinians can say, this doesn't change the peace map, even if we don't favor settlement activity anywhere. Point four, as long as Israel makes clear that what it won't do, which is build new settlement activity beyond the barrier, maybe the U.S. would say, we will maintain our veto at the UN so long as you maintain your commitment. Look, the point is, we're not in an all or nothing situation. We know the security is the most important issue for Israel. We know there's a meltdown of Arab nation states in the Middle East. We know that, and we know we're not going to solve this problem tomorrow. The question is, when it's all or nothing in the Middle East, it's always nothing. The question is, can you point in a direction? I think this would also be important, as I said in the panel, at a time of transition on the Palestinian side. We don't want the idea of nonviolence to be discredited. And when you look at the metrics, it's all going in the wrong way. So I think Israel has an interest in doing this now. And I think there's a package that could point to a direction, even if we don't solve the problem. We could then build on that as a baseline, which I'm happy to talk about, but I think that's beyond the Obama administration. Another alternative idea is to say, forget all this, and let's just, after the U.S. election in November, go to the Security Council and say, Kerry tried, everyone tried, we can't do the final status terms of reference, the parameters, so the UN will put it down. The problem there is, the good news is you'd finally have terms of reference. The not as good news is we don't know if it'll be a magnet for both of these communities to work towards for the next 5 or 10 years. And in the meantime, is it a walkaway strategy for the United States, which is we put that down, we're done. So I think this is a question, whether it's a magnet or a repellent. Is it a baseline for defiance? That's the gamble with that approach. But it's a debate.
So, to you now, Galia, how likely it is that something will happen before Obama leaves the White House? In terms of, you have such a large perspective of research on the peace process.
I think it's very hard to expect anything to happen so long as Netanyahu's in power. I think that's the real question. If we want to talk theoretically, what could be done and what might make a difference, in my opinion, particularly if we look at past negotiations and the failures in the past, I think a very key element was said in the panel we had this morning. and that is that there has to be an end game. I think for the Palestinians, if we want to try to stop violence, if we want any kind of process to move forward, I think it's critical that there be an end game in view. And certainly it helps to improve the situation on the ground, improve life, the economic situation. But these are stopgap measures, and they're not going to make the overall difference.
So what's the end game now?
The end game has to be very clear, I think, to both sides, and it's possible that the United States could do that by by putting on the table a set of parameters, but a very clear end game that there will be two states, there will be security arrangements. I was very surprised to hear that there was agreement, apparently, or at least the possibility of reaching agreement in the Kerry talks on issues of land and refugees, since those were the big issues in the past. We know in the past Abu Mazen and Olmert came very close on Jerusalem, and they actually reached agreement on security. Security is a key element, there's no question about it. And the changes that Yossi Beilin mentioned are very clear in terms of terrorism and Daesh. But I think there's a solution out there, and that's NATO, which is what Olmert and Abu Mazen agreed to in terms of security arrangements. But it has to be clear to Israelis that we're talking about the end of conflict. It has to be clear to the Palestinians that we're talking about a Palestinian state, an independent Palestinian state. And I think it would make a difference if Obama could come out with parameters, and if not, maybe then the UN will have to do it. But otherwise, nothing is moving. I can't say that this will move Netanyahu, but it might set the stage for something later.
Would you settle for less than the end of conflict as the objective for the foreseeable future?
I don't think we can take on the settlers, and the settlers will undoubtedly play a spoiler's role. I don't think we can take on the settlers without end of conflict being clear. I don't think you can ask people to sacrifice, not Palestinians and not Israelis, if they don't know that there's going to be something at the end. For Israelis, it has to be end of conflict. But the obstacle to end of conflict, by the way, in the past, seemed to be refugees. If that issue can be resolved, I don't see any problem with the other issues. And I do believe there is.
You don't see any problem with Jerusalem?
No. I think
sites,
that Abu Mazen and Olmert came very, very close to a settlement on Jerusalem. Abu Mazen made very serious concessions, by the way. All the Jewish neighborhoods, meaning all the settlements besides Hal Homa, would be under Israeli sovereignty. That was a big concession. But apparently he was willing to do it. I think even Arafat was willing to go fairly far on that. So I think refugees remain for us a very serious issue. If that is close to resolution, I don't see why we can't have parameters on the table where Israelis know where it's going, and Israelis want to be finished with the conflict. Israelis aren't all settlers. They want to see an end of the conflict. They just don't believe it's possible. If we can see that end of conflict is on the stage, and of course the Palestinians have to see that there's an end game for them.
So maybe we start not with the end game or the parameters, but just reiterating George W. Bush's letter to Prime Minister Sharon. Start by that.
Look, this has been a big, if I had to chart
Exactly.
the tension with the U.S.-Israel relations in this administration, it started with that, with the lack of the reaffirmation of the Sharon letter. The problem is this administration believes a lot of the blocks are unilaterally designated by Israel. There's blocks even east of the barrier, and I just don't see the same president who went to Cairo saying, I don't accept the legitimacy of settlements, to say, I'm going to accept all the blocks. What I do think is possible is a more what I call differentiated American view towards settlements. I think in a strange way, the American approach, and I'm saying this in a self-critical way, by being critical of every settlement, we have lost the Israeli people, the center of Israel, which sees a difference between Ramat Eshkol, French Hill, downtown Jerusalem, and Itamar, Yitzhar, Elon Moreh, and all these places that are clearly outside the barrier and outside the blocks. And therefore, what I was trying to argue for is a more nuanced approach on our side that would say, hey, you want Netanyahu to say, you're not building beyond the barrier, you've got to be more nuanced in areas that you know and Abu Mazen knows will be Israeli. I think that could be done, but I think the Sharon letter for this administration is a bridge too far, because it gets to unilateral designations of areas that the U.S. side certainly thinks are up for negotiation. Ariel, for example, other places. So therefore, I don't think realistically this administration is going to reaffirm it, but I do think they can do something that would be less absolutist, more differentiated, and could rally the center of the Israeli public opinion to American positions.
And in light of the spoilers that are waiting to emerge, some of them exist already. I know that you've been researching that for the last couple of years. We're going to co-edit a book, an edited volume together on that. What do you think could be done in order to address those very visible spoilers that lie ahead of us?
I think much of the literature, of course, says you've got to engage them. Well, that's a little bit difficult if you're going to be talking about evacuating a large number of settlers. And these, of course, are the major spoilers. But there are a number of things that can be done, and I don't think they need to be ignored. Again, I do believe that an end game is very important. I think even for the spoilers, if they know what's being planned, exactly where they're going to be able to stay, where they're not going to be able to stay. And I do think an end game is important also for spoilers on the other side. But I must admit that one of the major things that helps spoilers is a long, drawn-out arrangement. And we talk often about, of course, doing things in steps, a long implementation. These, unfortunately, play right into the hands of the spoilers. It gives them time to mobilize, it gives them time to act, and it gives them time to stop the process. And I think one of the problems with Oslo is it was an interim agreement. Not only did people not know what the end game was, but it also stretched out. And one has to remember
that the imperfection of implementation.
This is one of the problems, but it can be overcome. Again, if people know exactly what's going to happen, with the timetable, with monitoring, with very, very clear goals, it can be overcome. I think it should be as short as possible, because I think we also have to remember the issue of violence from the other side, and they're also spoilers. And there will be violence so long as Israel controls the coming and goings of the Palestinians. So long as we control so long as we control, say, the outer borders, all the outer borders, we're controlling their movement. So long as that happens, we're going to have violence. We're going to have resistors. We're going to have spoilers that can attract a public on their side. So I think these things have to be very carefully done. That's why monitoring is so important. I think also, by the way, on our own side, engaging civil society, talking to people, trying to break down some of the barriers, mainly dealing with the fears. There's no question that that's going to be a major, major issue. But you can deal with the fears. I must admit, I keep going back to the same thing. Monitoring and a very, very clear plan where you know at what day and what time you're going to end this thing, and that it will end, and that there will obviously be security arrangements. But it has to be clear.
A clear and binding process.
I think it has to be a relatively rapid process, and that's unfortunately one of the things we've learned from the past. For all that it's difficult, one of the things that Rabin wanted to do was to build trust. Okay. But what happens if you take a long period, it's going to happen in exactly the opposite direction.
Thank you very much. We're ran out of time, so thank you, Galia, and thank you, David, and all the best to you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.